Once a poor servant girl worked quietly in a cruel king's palace. One small mistake changes everything. The king throws her into a cage of tigers. But what happens next will shock you. Watch till the end, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling stories. In the heart of golden Nigerian palace, where sunlight spilled across polished marble floors and danced on towering carved pillars, Amara, a poor servant girl, moved quietly among the nobles and guards, performing her endless chores with meticulous care. Her cotton gown was simple, her braided hair tied neatly, and her dark eyes always downcast to avoid the wrath of King Oba Adeyemi, a ruler feared across the kingdom for his cruelty and iron-fisted reign. That day, during a grand feast filled with roasted yam, peppered chicken, and fragrant spices, the palace glittered with gold ornaments, colorful Yoruba textiles, and the bustling energy of nobles, guards, and villagers alike. But fate had other plans. As Amara carried a tray of roasted meat to the serving area, her foot caught on the edge of a patterned rug, and the tray slipped from her hands, spilling pieces of roasted food across the polished marble right at the king's feet. The hall went silent for a heartbeat, the clatter echoing like a warning drum to the cavernous space. King Oba Adeyemi, draped in crimson agbada embroidered with gold, his golden crown tilted slightly as if to emphasize his authority, froze in visible rage. His jeweled staff trembled in his hand as he stared down at Amara, his lips curling into a cruel smile before he shouted in anger that reverberated through the palace. This girl must learn the cost of disrespect. She will face a punishment that none here will forget. The nobles murmured nervously, stepping back, while the guards grabbed Amara, her small frame trembling but her eyes wide with courage that she barely understood herself. Before anyone could intervene, the king commanded that Amara be brought into the massive iron cage at the far end of the palace courtyard, a cage that held 3 majestic tigers. Their golden fur shone like molten bronze in the sunlight, muscles coil like springs, and amber eyes glimmer with a fierce intelligence that made even the bravest guard hesitate. The entire courtyard empty for the spectacle, nobles and villagers lining the edges, whispers of fear and curiosity filling the air as Amara was pushed forward. Her heart pounded like a drum against her chest, but there was no time to despair. Her hands clenched the fold of her gown, and she drew in a deep breath, steadying herself. These tigers were not mere beasts. They were the embodiment of power, danger, and the king's own hubris. Yet unknown to the king, Amara had a secret. In the quiet moments before, when no one was watching, she had left scraps of food near the cage, small acts of kindness that the tigers had noticed. They remembered her. As she stepped into the cage, their ears twitched, and they sniffed the air, recognizing a scent of familiarity. The king, standing tall in his crimson robes, bellowed that they attack, but the tigers only shifted their weight, their amber eyes narrowing as if questioning this command. The nobles gasped, leaning forward, and even the guards froze, their hands gripping their spears tightly, unsure of what would happen next. The tigers' dominance was palpable, their movements fluid and commanding, and yet there was no immediate aggression toward Amara. She stood in the middle of the cage, small and trembling, but there was an undeniable calm in her eyes as she bowed slightly, a gesture of respect rather than fear, and the tigers circled her slowly, tails swishing, observing her every movement. King Oba Adeyemi's face darkened with fury. How dare his deadly guardians defy him in the eyes of the entire kingdom? He stepped closer, his jeweled staff tapping the marble floor, demanding obedience. But the tigers did not move toward Amara. Instead, they positioned themselves subtly, their bodies angled in such a way that even the king's shadow fell among them. The nobles whispered, "Look at the courage of the girl. Look at the calm of the tigers." The king's pride began to crack. He was no longer the absolute master of this moment. His fists clenched, and beads of sweat formed on his forehead as the tiger's presence radiated power, unyielding and untouchable. The air was thick with tension, sunlight glinting off the iron bars of the cage, casting long shadows that stretched across the polished marble floor, amplifying the drama of the scene. Amara's small chest rose and fell steadily, her mind focused not on fear, but on staying calm, keeping her movements slow and deliberate, showing no sign of panic. The moment stretched like a taut string ready to snap. The tigers, with their majestic fur rippling under the sunlight, moved in silent unison, circling the king slightly as he took another step forward, asserting his authority, only to be met with their unwavering gaze. Every noble, every guard, every villager held their breath. The king's booming voice, once commanding and feared, now seemed to waver, betraying the realization that his cruelty might not triumph as he had intended. The tigers were not attacking Amara. They were sending a silent message, their sheer presence enough to turn the power of the room against the king. Whispers turned into murmurs of awe as Amara's calm bravery and the tiger's recognition of her kindness created a spectacle none would forget. In that golden palace courtyard, under the warm Nigerian sun, the impossible became visible. A poor servant girl, standing unharmed amidst fearsome tigers, facing a cruel king whose own hubris had become his weakness. The king's anger transformed into confusion and humiliation as he realized that what was meant to punish Amara had backfired completely. The tigers, calm yet commanding, seemed almost like guardians of justice, their amber eyes reflecting the sunlight and the lesson of this moment, that cruelty can be challenged and courage, even in the smallest of hearts, can shift the balance of power. By the time Amara left the cage, escorted safely by the still astonished guards, the nobles and villagers were in awe. They had witnessed not just bravery, but a subtle form of justice where strength and kindness converged to humble a tyrant. The golden palace, the towering pillars, the sunlight, and the tigers themselves became a living testament to a story of courage, respect, and poetic justice that would echo through the kingdom for generations. As the golden sunlight poured through the tall palace arches, illuminating the carved pillars and colorful Yoruba textiles fluttering gently in the breeze, Amara stepped lightly out of the tiger cage, her small frame standing tall against the weight of the crowd's astonished gazes. The tigers, their fur gleaming like molten bronze in the warm light, remained calm within the massive iron cage, eyes following her every move with an uncanny intelligence that left even the bravest nobles uneasy. King Oba Adeyemi, still in his crimson agbada with golden embroidery, his crown slightly tilted from his earlier fluster, stepped forward with a heavy frown, trying to assert authority, but the confidence in his stride had already wavered. Whispers rippled to the palace like a soft wind through tall grass. Guards shifted nervously. Nobles leaned in closer, and even villagers at the edges of the courtyard pressed to see what would happen next. The spectacle had not ended with Amara's safety. Far from it. The air was thick with tension, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and awe, as every eye followed the drama of a small servant girl who had faced what no ordinary human dared approach. The king raised his jeweled staff, attempting to regain control, his voice booming across the marble courtyard. "These beasts belong to me. Obey me now." But the tigers, already loyal to the scent of kindness they recognized in Amara, did not flinch, and their presence alone made the king's command hollow, echoing uselessly against the stone walls. Every movement he made, from the tilt of his head to the tapping of his staff, was met with the tiger's calm, almost judicial observation. He realized, slowly and painfully, that the power he wielded over life and death in the palace could not bend these majestic creatures, nor could it diminish the bravery emanating from Amara, whose poise seemed to radiate courage like sunlight spilling across the polished marble. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, a symphony of shock and admiration, as nobles whispered each other about the girl's bravery, the tiger's uncanny obedience, and the humiliation of the king who had expected a moment of entertainment that turned into a lesson in humility. Amara, though exhausted from the tension of the previous moments, held her head high. Her simple white gown reflected the brilliance of the sun, and her dark braided hair shimmered, as if lit from within by her inner strength. Even the guards, who had moments ago been tense and ready to intervene, now lowered their spears slightly, exchanging glances that silently acknowledged that the events unfolding were beyond ordinary understanding. The tiger's presence was not threatening to her. Rather, it was as if they were guardians, silently communicating the balance between respect, courage, and justice. The king, meanwhile, felt a shiver of unease running down his spine. The power he believed absolute had been defied not by weapons, not by cunning, but by a combination of human courage and the quiet intelligence of nature's fiercest creatures. His nobles and the villagers could sense it too, a subtle shift in the energy of the palace that left the once feared ruler suddenly vulnerable, almost human in his fear and embarrassment. Amara's gaze swept across the courtyard. The golden sunlight highlighted the intricate carvings on the palace pillars, the bright colors of ceremonial fabrics, and the polished marble floor that reflected the entire scene like a mirror of fate. She could feel the eyes of everyone upon her, yet her mind was focused solely on maintaining calm, demonstrating that true strength does not always roar. Sometimes it stands silently in the face of danger. The tigers, sensing her steadiness, relaxed slightly, their muscles still taut, eyes still alert, but no longer tense, as though they too had acknowledged that Amara was the center of this unfolding moment. The king, realizing that the spectacle he had intended to be a display of power had instead become a lesson in humility, tried to compose himself, raising his voice to address the court. But his words were met with stifled laughter and incredulous whispers. His rage no longer commanded obedience, but drew attention to his own folly. Every attempt to reassert dominance only highlighted the shift in control. The tiger's calm presence and Amara's bravery had altered the balance. The courtiers exchanged glances, some hiding smiles, others shaking their heads, all fully aware that the hierarchy of fear and power in the palace had changed in a single, dramatic moment. Amara's mind, however, was not on the king's humiliation. It was on survival and the subtle understanding she had always held about the tigers. She stepped back carefully, measuring every footfall against the marble floor's shine, aware that any sudden movement could change the tension of the moment. The tigers mirrored her caution, pacing slowly within the cage, their amber eyes following her movements as if acknowledging her courage and rewarding her respect. King Oba Adeyemi, chest rising and falling in heavy breaths, finally understood that brute authority alone could not bend all forces to his will. The crowd's whisper crescendoed, a mixture of awe and relief, as the realization settled. The servant girl had turned the palace's most dangerous creatures into allies not by force, but by kindness, patience, and bravery. The nobles were silent, the guards tense but reverent, and even the villagers who had come to witness the punishment now watched the transformation of power in the courtyard. In that golden hour, the palace itself seemed to bow to the quiet lesson unfolding. Sunlight reflected off the marble, gilded ornaments, and the tiger's bronze golden fur, creating a cinematic tableau of suspense, courage, and justice. Amara's small frame seemed luminous against the tension around her, and the king, for all his grandeur and jewels, appeared diminished in comparison. The tiger's calm dominance, their intelligent observation, and Amara's unwavering bravery combined to teach a lesson none in the palace would forget. Even the youngest servant and the oldest noble could sense that power wielded without respect and cruelty displayed without understanding would always be humbled in the face of courage, loyalty, and the quiet, unstoppable force of nature aligned with virtue. By the time Amara stepped fully out of the cage, escorted gently by the still astonished guards, the courtyard was alive with murmurs of admiration, whispers of disbelief, and the silent acknowledgement that she had achieved something extraordinary. The tigers, still within their cage, seemed almost like statues of guardianship, reflecting the sunlight, symbolizing justice and the balance of power, while the king, chest heavy with frustration and humiliation, finally realized that fear alone could not command respect or loyalty. Amara's name would echo through the palace halls for generations, not for the error that had nearly cost her, but for the bravery, wisdom, and courage that had changed the fate of the cruel king's own court, leaving all who witnessed the event in awe of a humble servant girl whose actions spoke louder than the roar of kings or the growl of tigers. As the golden sunlight shifted across the vast courtyard of the Nigerian palace, its rays illuminating the polished marble floors and the intricate carvings of towering pillars, the air seemed charged with an almost tangible electricity, a mixture of awe, suspense, and a lingering whisper of danger that clung to every corner of the grand hall. Amara, the small but resilient servant girl, moved with deliberate grace, her every step measured and calm, her eyes reflecting a quiet confidence that belied the fear she had felt moments before. The three tigers, their fur gleaming like molten gold under the bright sunlight, remained inside the massive iron cage, muscles rippling beneath their sleek coats, tails swishing with slow precision, and amber eyes following her every motion as if acknowledging her courage and her unspoken bond with them. The nobles, still lying along the edges of the courtyard, exchanged glances filled with astonishment, their earlier whispers now replaced by murmurs of admiration. Even the guards, who had once gripped their spears tightly, now stood with lowered weapons, eyes wide and head slightly bowed, as if silently agreeing that the girl's bravery had transformed the very energy of the palace. King Oba Adeyemi, still adorned in his crimson agbada embroidered with gold threads, his jewel crown slightly askew, struggled to regain the composure that had evaporated in the presence of the tiger's calm authority and the girl's unwavering poise. His chest rose and fell rapidly. Frustration and disbelief battled within him as he realized that what he had intended as a spectacle of humiliation for Amara had backfired completely, turning the focus onto his own hubris and inadequacies. The sunlight glinted off the polished marble floors, reflecting the tension and drama like a mirror of fate, capturing every subtle expression, every involuntary movement, and every unspoken thought that filled the golden hall with a silent, cinematic gravity. Amara's gaze swept across the courtyard, taking in the bright, vibrant colors of ceremonial fabrics hanging from the walls, the glimmering gold ornaments adorning the nobles, and the sunlit courtyard filled with onlookers who could barely process the scene unfolding before them. She felt no fear. Instead, a deep, steady calm settled within her chest, her courage bolstered by the silent support of the tigers who had recognized her kindness and respected her presence. The king stepped forward again, attempting to assert his authority, his jeweled staff tapping the marble with force meant to intimidate. But even as he moved, the tigers shifted slightly, subtly altering their stance in a way that reminded everyone that their power was not to be underestimated. Each tiger's movement, each flick of an ear, and each slow blink of their amber eyes conveyed a silent judgment that left the king's voice faltering. "These creatures obey me," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. But the words rang hollow against the energy of the courtyard, a stark reminder that authority rooted in fear alone could not command loyalty or respect. The nobles whispered, some trying to hide smiles, others shaking their heads in disbelief, while villagers at the edges of the courtyard leaned forward, captivated by the unexpected turn of events. The palace, which had once been a symbol of absolute power and control, now reflected a subtle but undeniable shift in the balance, a reminder that courage, patience, and compassion could influence even the most formidable of forces. Amara, standing tall and composed, allowed her eyes to meet those of the king briefly. There was no malice in her gaze, only a serene clarity that conveyed an unspoken message. Cruelty may demand obedience, but courage and integrity inspire respect. The tigers, attuned to her calm demeanor, relaxed slightly, their powerful bodies still tense but no longer rigid, as if acknowledging that Amara had earned a quiet but absolute dominance within this charged space. The king, chest heaving, shifted uncomfortably under the weight of his own humiliation, the murmurs of the crowd echoing around him like a constant reminder that his plan had failed. The marble floor beneath him reflected the sunlight, the flickering shadows of the tigers, and the unwavering stance of Amara, creating a living tableau of drama, tension, and poetic justice. Every noble, guard, and onlooker could feel the shift in energy. The once unquestioned ruler had been humbled, and a simple servant girl had emerged victorious in a battle of courage and presence. As the moments stretched, the courtyard seemed to hold its breath. The tigers, still within their cage, paced slowly in measured arcs, their amber eyes flicking occasionally toward Amara, acknowledging her with an intelligence that seemed almost human. She could feel their silent respect, a bond formed through her previous acts of kindness and the calm confidence she had displayed in facing what no ordinary servant would dare. The king's attempts to regain composure became increasingly frantic, but every movement, every command, every attempt to assert dominance was met with subtle resistance from the environment itself. The tiger's watchful eyes, the expectant whispers of the nobles, and the awestruck stares of the villagers combined to create an invisible pressure that even the king could not overcome. Sunlight reflected off the golden ornaments, the bright fabrics, and the polished marble, highlighting the contrast between the humility of Amara and the faltering authority of the ruler who had sought to dominate her. It was as if the palace itself bore witness to the triumph of courage, patience, and respect over cruelty, creating a tableau that would be remembered and recounted for generations. The crowd, now fully captivated, began to murmur in amazement at Amara's bravery. Servants whispered among themselves, sharing glances that acknowledged the girl's extraordinary courage. Nobles, who had once feared the king's wrath more than anything else, now felt a mixture of relief and admiration. Even the villagers, who had come expecting a display of punishment, found themselves in awe of the calm, measured bravery that had turned the king's own power against him. The tigers, still pacing within the cage, became symbols of loyalty, strength, and the unpredictable power of nature when aligned with virtue. The king, despite his grand robes, his crown, and the golden staff in his hand, could do nothing but stand frozen, his face a mixture of frustration, humiliation, and a dawning understanding that authority rooted in cruelty could never command true respect. Amara, standing tall, allowed herself a quiet, almost imperceptible smile. She had survived, yes, but more importantly, she had demonstrated that courage, integrity, and kindness could bend even the most intimidating forces to a greater purpose. By the time Amara stepped fully out of the cage, escorted by the still astonished guards, the entire courtyard erupted into murmurs of admiration. The golden sunlight cast long shadows across the marble, highlighting the elegance of the tigers and the serenity of the girl who had faced them unflinchingly. The nobles and villagers alike were united in awe, realizing that the balance of power had shifted dramatically in a single, unforgettable moment. The king, seated now slightly off-center on his throne, chest rising and falling rapidly, could not meet her gaze. The lesson had been learned. Cruelty may demand obedience, but courage and respect command loyalty, admiration, and change. In the palace, long after the tigers had returned to their quiet vigilance within the cage, the story of Amara's bravery and the subtle but unmistakable humbling of the king would echo through the halls for generations, a living reminder that even the smallest of hearts can hold the strength to inspire awe, enforce justice, and alter destiny. As the golden light of Nigerian sun poured through the towering arches of the palace, cascading over polished marble floors and glinting off the elaborate carvings that adorned every pillar, the tension in the courtyard settled into a suspenseful calm, a charged stillness that seemed to hold its breath along with every noble, guard, and villager who had gathered to witness the unfolding drama. Amara, the small but resolute servant girl, moved carefully across the marble, her steps deliberate and steady, the folds of her simple white gown catching the sunlight as it illuminated from within. Her dark braided hair shimmered against her shoulders, and her eyes, wide but resolute, reflected both fear and an unwavering courage that seemed to radiate through the courtyard like a beacon. The tigers, still confined within their massive iron cage, paced with measured precision, their amber eyes flicking occasionally to Amara as if affirming her presence and silently acknowledging her bravery. Every ripple of muscle beneath their golden fur, every subtle twitch of an ear, and every slow, deliberate blink communicated an intelligence that the crowd could sense even without fully understanding it. King Oba Adeyemi, still adorned in his crimson agbada embroidered with gold threads, his crown slightly askew from his earlier discomposure, struggled to regain his composure, each step heavier than the last as he attempted to reassert his authority over the situation he had intended to control completely. Yet the more he moved, the more evident became that his power, rooted in fear and cruelty, had been challenged in a way he had never anticipated, leaving him exposed to the judgment of not only the tigers, but the very people who had once trembled at his word. The nobles leaned forward, eyes wide with fascination, murmuring among themselves in hushed tones about the remarkable scene that unfolded. A simple servant girl, unarmed and vulnerable, standing in calm defiance while the kingdom's fiercest creatures recognized her presence with respect rather than aggression. Guards shifted uneasily, gripping their spears less tightly as they witnessed a power not born of weapons or fear, but of courage and integrity, a force that seemed to ripple outward, subtly influencing the energy of the entire courtyard. Villagers at the edges of the palace, who had come expecting a punishment, now pressed forward slightly, eyes filled with awe and disbelief, whispering stories to each other of bravery and intelligence overcoming cruelty. Amara's calm demeanor, combined with the tiger's silent recognition of her, created a scene so cinematic and surreal that even the sunlight seemed to pause, highlighting the polished marble, the golden ornaments, and the colorful ceremonial fabrics that fluttered gently in the warm breeze. Every element of the palace, the soaring pillars, the intricate carvings, the gleaming floors, conspired to frame a tableau of suspense, courage, and poetic justice, casting the girl's bravery in a light that made the king's attempts at dominance appear increasingly hollow. King Oba Adeyemi, feeling the weight of every eye upon him, finally took a step back, the jeweled staff in his hand tapping the marble in a rhythm that betrayed his faltering control. His chest rose and fell rapidly, frustration and disbelief warring in his expression as he realized the magnitude of what had occurred. The punishment he had orchestrated to demonstrate his absolute authority had instead become a testament to the servant girl's strength and the tiger's unexpected discernment. The crowd could sense his internal struggle, a silent battle between ego and humility, as he attempted to mask the humiliation that had crept into his posture and the subtle tremor in his voice. Amara, ever composed, allowed herself a slow, deliberate glance at the king, not with hatred, but with a quiet assertion of dignity and moral strength that radiated through the courtyard. She had faced the tigers without fear, had earned their recognition, and in doing so, had exposed the limits of the king's power in a way that words or protests could never achieve. The tigers, pacing steadily within the cage, now seemed almost statuesque, their movements measured and deliberate, eyes locked on both Amara and the king, silently emphasizing that bravery and respect commanded more influence than cruelty ever could. The murmurs of the crowd swelled into a soft chorus of awe, the once hushed whispers of nobles and villagers now blending into a collective acknowledgement of Amara's triumph. Servants exchanged glances, their expressions reflecting the mixture of disbelief and admiration, while nobles who had once relied on fear to command obedience now realized that true authority was rooted in integrity, courage, and subtle intelligence. Even the guards, who had spent years enforcing the king's edicts with unflinching discipline, now found themselves reassessing the nature of power and the significance of bravery displayed by someone so small and seemingly insignificant in the hierarchical structure of the palace. The courtyard, once a space of rigid control and predictable obedience, had been transformed into a stage where the unexpected display of courage and intelligence had shifted the perception of authority entirely. The polished marble reflected the sunlight and the shadows of the tigers, creating a visual rhythm that mirrored the tension and eventual release of the dramatic encounter, while the golden ornaments and colorful fabrics seemed to amplify the spectacle, emphasizing the cinematic quality of the moment. Amara's steps across the marble floor were slow and deliberate, her presence commanding attention not through force but through the quiet assurance of one who has faced true danger and emerged unshaken. The tigers, sensing the resolution of the moment, relaxed subtly, pacing with less urgency but maintaining their imposing stance, as if communicating to all present that justice and courage had prevailed without bloodshed. The king, standing amidst the court, began to understand the depth of his miscalculation. His cruelty had been turned against him not through violence, but through a combination of bravery, respect, and the natural intelligence of the tigers he had hoped to use as instruments of punishment. The crowd, watching closely, could see the subtle shifts in his posture, the hesitant lowering of his head, and the almost imperceptible signs of humility that crept into his expression. This was a moment of teaching, a reminder that power wielded without understanding or compassion could easily be humbled, and that courage, even from the smallest among them, could inspire awe and change. Amara's steps across the marble floor were slow and deliberate, her presence commanding attention not through force, but through the quiet assurance of one who has faced true danger and emerged unshaken. The tigers, sensing the resolution of the moment, relaxed subtly, pacing with less urgency but maintaining their imposing stance, as if communicating to all present that justice and courage had prevailed without bloodshed. The king, standing amidst the court, began to understand the depth of his miscalculation. His cruelty had been turned against him not through violence, but through a combination of bravery, respect, and the natural intelligence of the tigers he had hoped to use as instruments of punishment. The crowd, watching closely, could see the subtle shifts in his posture, the hesitant lowering of his head, and the almost imperceptible signs of humility that crept into his expression. This was a moment of teaching, a reminder that power wielded without understanding or compassion could easily be humbled, and that courage, even from the smallest among them, could inspire awe and change. By the time Amara had moved to the edge of the courtyard, escorted gently by the still astonished guards, the tigers had settled into a calm rhythm, their amber eyes reflecting the sunlight and the quiet strength of the girl who had faced them unflinchingly. Nobles whispered among themselves, villagers exchanged awed glances, and even the youngest servants could feel the resonance of the lesson that unfolded before them. Cruelty can only command fear, but bravery, integrity, and respect command admiration, loyalty, and transformation. King Oba Adeyemi, his chest heaving with the realization of his own vulnerability, sat down slightly off-center on his throne, the jeweled staff in his hand heavier than ever, and the golden crown on his head seemed to weigh more than its physical presence could explain. The palace, once a symbol of absolute power and control, had witnessed a profound shift in authority, and Amara, small but unyielding, had emerged as the center of that transformation. The tigers, silent and majestic, became living symbols of loyalty, strength, and intelligence, their presence immortalized in the memory of everyone who had been present. And as the sunlight poured across the courtyard, illuminating every polished surface, casting long, dramatic shadows, and highlighting the serene yet commanding presence of Amara, the palace understood a truth that would be remembered for generations. True strength is not measured by fear imposed or punishment inflicted, but by courage and integrity, and the quiet force of one who stands unwavering in the face of danger. The golden light of the Nigerian sun continued to bathe the palace courtyard in warmth, illuminating every carved pillar, every polished marble floor, and every intricate design that decorated the grand halls of King Oba Adeyemi's domain, casting long, dramatic shadows that seemed to mirror the tension and drama that had unfolded within these walls. Amara, the small but unyielding servant girl, moved with a quiet grace that contrasted sharply with the grandeur and intimidation that surrounded her. Every step she took across the marble floors was deliberate, measured, and commanding, as if the courage she held inside radiated outward, touching every noble, guard, and villager who dared to look her way. The tigers, confined to their massive iron cage but still exuding an aura of unmatched strength, traced slow, deliberate arcs, amber eyes following her with a calm intelligence that made their presence feel both protective and majestic. The nobles whispered among themselves, some in awe, some in disbelief, all acutely aware that they were witnessing a display of courage and calm that had turned the palace's power structure upside down. Even the guards, who had long been instruments of the king's absolute authority, now lowered their spears subtly, understanding that true strength lay not in weapons or fear, but in bravery, integrity, and the quiet assertion of presence that Amara embodied. King Oba Adeyemi, still clad in his crimson agbada embroidered with gold threads, his jewel crown slightly tilted from earlier disturbances, stood frozen in place, struggling to regain the composure that had eluded him since the girl had entered the tiger cage. His chest rose and fell rapidly, a mixture of frustration, disbelief, and dawning humility coloring his expression, as he realized that the punishment he had orchestrated to showcase his power had instead revealed his own vulnerabilities. Every gesture he made, every attempt to assert dominance, seemed to falter under the invisible weight of the tiger's calm intelligence and the palpable courage of Amara. The sunlight reflected off the polished marble, golden ornaments, and colorful fabrics, creating a tableau that magnified the contrast between the king's faltering authority and the servant girl's quiet yet undeniable command of presence. The courtyard, once a space of rigid control and fear, had transformed into a living stage of suspense, awe, and poetic justice, where bravery had triumphed over cruelty and intelligence had outshone intimidation. Amara's gaze swept across the courtyard, taking in the bright ceremonial fabrics, the glinting gold ornaments, and the faces of nobles and villagers, all united in their recognition of what had occurred. Her dark eyes reflected a calm certainty, a steady inner strength that seemed to grow with each passing moment, radiating outward to influence the energy of the entire palace. The tigers, sensing the resolution of the drama, moved with fluid precision, pacing slowly yet purposefully within the cage, their amber eyes unwavering in their watch over her and the court. Even the smallest twitch of an ear or flick of a tail seemed intentional, a silent message that the balance of power had shifted, and that courage and respect had replaced fear as the true currency of influence. The king's jeweled staff, once a symbol of unquestionable authority, now fell heavy in his hands, an outward manifestation of the internal realization that his cruelty and hubris had been humbled in the presence of a servant girl's bravery and the natural intelligence of the tigers he had meant to use as instruments of punishment. Whispers and murmurs in the crowd rose like a soft wave, growing louder as everyone present internalized the spectacle they had just witnessed. Servants exchanged glances filled with awe, nobles leaned closer to share words of disbelief, and villagers at the edges of the courtyard whispered tales of bravery that would be repeated for years to come. Every person in that sunlit palace could feel the shift in authority. The king, once untouchable and feared, had been rendered powerless not by violence or cunning, but by the extraordinary courage of Amara and the silent judgment of the tigers. The marble floors reflected the sunlight and the shifting shadows of the tigers, amplifying the cinematic quality of the moment, while the golden ornaments and fluttering fabrics highlighted the contrast between humility and hubris, bravery and cruelty, patience and impulsiveness. Amara, though small in stature, commanded the attention of everyone present, her quiet dignity and unwavering resolve becoming the focal point of a story that would echo through the palace halls and the minds of all who had witnessed it. King Oba Adeyemi, chest heaving and jaw tight, finally understood the depth of his miscalculation. His cruelty, intended to inspire fear and obedience, had only served to expose his vulnerability. Every step he took, every gesture meant to reclaim authority, was met with subtle resistance from the tiger's watchful eyes and the silent acknowledgement of Amara's bravery. The nobles and villagers watched closely, sensing that this was not merely a confrontation between a servant girl and a king, but a lesson in the true nature of power. It is not the fear one instills or the punishments one commands, but the courage, integrity, and quiet strength of those who stand unyielding in the face of danger that ultimately shapes destiny. Amara's small hands, clasped lightly in front of her, radiated a calm confidence that seemed to ripple through the courtyard, influencing everyone present, including the king, who felt the weight of humility pressing down upon him as he finally acknowledged the lessons that had unfolded before his eyes. The tigers, sensing the conclusion of the moment, ceased their pacing and settled into statuesque positions, their amber eyes still fixed on Amara and the king, silently affirming that justice, courage, and respect had triumphed without a single act of violence. The sunlight gleamed off their sleek fur, reflecting a brilliance that mirrored the strength and calmness of the girl who had faced them fearlessly. Nobles whispered among themselves, acknowledging that they had witnessed an extraordinary event. A poor servant girl had turned the kingdom's most dangerous creatures into guardians of her courage, forcing even the mighty king to confront the limitations of his authority. The courtyard, alive with the sounds of awe and admiration, seemed to vibrate with the energy of a story that would be remembered for generations, a living testament to the power of bravery, integrity, and respect over cruelty, fear, and oppression. By the time Amara stepped fully away from the cage, escorted by guards who were still astonished by the sequence of events, the entire palace had absorbed the lesson in its most vivid form. The tigers remained majestic and calm, their presence a reminder that nature's strength, when aligned with virtue and courage, can transform the balance of power. King Oba Adeyemi, seated now slightly off-center on his throne, jeweled staff resting heavily in his hands, and crown glinting uneasily in the sunlight, finally lowered his gaze, acknowledging the subtle but undeniable shift that had taken place. Humiliation, respect, and awe mingled in the air, settling into a quiet recognition that bravery and wisdom can overcome even the most formidable of obstacles. Amara, small but unwavering, had become a symbol of courage, patience, and intelligence, her story destined to be told throughout the palace and beyond, a tale of triumph, justice, and the transformative power of the human spirit allied with the majesty of nature. As the sun began to cast long, warm shadows across the palace courtyard, highlighting the intricate carvings, the glinting ornaments, and the polished marble floors, the story of Amara's bravery and the humbling of King Oba Adeyemi crystallized into a living legend. Every noble, guard, and villager who had witnessed the events knew they had seen more than a simple confrontation. They had witnessed the embodiment of courage, loyalty, and the subtle, undeniable influence of integrity over fear. The tigers, still poised within their cage, reflected the sunlight in a display of serene majesty, a silent reminder that true power respects virtue, recognizes bravery, and aligns itself with those who act with honor. Amara, her steps calm but purposeful, walked toward the far end of the courtyard, her presence commanding attention without a word, leaving behind a palace transformed in spirit, a king humbled, and a story that would echo through generations as a testament to the strength, courage, and unwavering dignity of one brave servant girl.